Welcome to our little recap of week 2 / Q&A / whatever you'd like to talk about. Make sure your mic is muted so we don't pick up any background noise if you're not speaking, but really feel free to chime in if you have any questions or comments. So let me share my desktop. All right. A couple of things I want to show you. Okay, are there any questions about essentially I'm going to demo or just launch SQL Server Management Studio. If you have any questions about that, please chime in. I just wanted to show everyone, I know there were some questions about and error messages that were sporadically received. So I just wanted to show you a couple things that I was alluding to as far as the comments from that first week. The first one, basically, when everything is installed correctly in SSMS, you should receive basically your host name or your desktop or your laptop, whatever the name of that device should show in your server name. If for some reason it does not show or it's blank, that usually means that the SQL Server service is not starting. So you can either type in localhost and make sure it connects. So if everything is okay, you will see the SQL Server objects in the Object Explorer. If this area over here is blank, then that means that your SQL Server service is not running. Questions? All right. And to check that, just to give you a quick kind of a guidance, you can go to your Windows search. I'm actually running this on a Windows server, but in Windows 10, and basically type in service, make sure you spell it right. And it should, one of the choices will be the Windows services. So if you open that, well, I guess I should ask, can you all see my screen okay? I didn't really check to make sure, okay. All right, so if you open up services and if you navigate in here down to SQL Server, you'll see several services, but the one you're concerned about, at least at the baseline, is this one here, the SQL Server, MS SQL Server service. Make sure if it's not running, you can double click on it. I would set it to automatic and make sure it's used to start it. That's usually the biggest culprit as far as your SSMS not connecting to your server. All right. Yes, I am recording this and I will upload it to the announcements afterwards. Jalen. All right, so if that's running, and this is the main one, that's usually the one that creates the most problems as far as connecting. Are you welcome? So if that's running, you should be able to connect all the way and have your SSMS running, and you can create your database. The one thing that I wanted to speak to, and you're all going to essentially dig into the SSMS, just to give you kind of a start, and you'll do this much later, but in your Object Explorer, if you're new to SQL and some of those, I'm thinking that you're Googling some of these SQL commands, and a lot of it probably doesn't make sense, but your Object Explorer here will be your friend from creating a database. Basically, there's a wizard for all of this, which includes tables and creating primary keys, all of that. So I would definitely use your Object Explorer. I'm not going to go through any of these now, but you can start by giving your database a name. And remember, your final project will include essentially your process of developing your database for your little, whatever scenario that you chose. Uh, but, and of course, you can always click on new SQL or new query. And there's, and there, on the SQL, there are several SQL sites that you can copy and paste into this query launching window. And just to run through a very simple one, I have a database in here, which is our one of the Microsoft test database at VentureWorks. And you see that that database is there. So just to run a very basic query, I'm just going to select from one of the tables, if I can spell it correctly. Person dot. If I do my syntax correctly. So remember the syntax is select star from, and as you know, with the SSMS, we have this is a autocomplete wizard. Please use that when you begin to develop your database. It'll tell you that you're actually accessing the correct schema, correct table, or the correct entities, if you may. And with SSMS, you do have a run. All of these shortcut icons, and I will definitely ask you to investigate those. But whenever you create a query, you just click the execute button, and it'll run through whatever query. And that includes creating tables, dropping tables, everything that you can do in SQL. And the good thing about this, question in the chat, and the new query is that where you can also add, delete, yes. This is, you can do all of that in this new query window. You can follow the syntax, i.e. create table, and then all the attributes of your table entity, primary key. And once again, you can also do this with the wizards. By clicking on any of the levels in the wizards. As a matter of fact, under a database, you can create tables. Excuse me. Let's see. So there's a tables folder on your, whenever you create a database, SQL Server will automatically populate a certain attributes of your database. So you can create new tables, and there's a table wizard that you can walk through where it will, you know, basically create the table for you based on what you name it. That's one way to do it, and I would recommend that, but probably the easiest way is SQL. So create table, table name, etc., and then your column names, the data type, and things like primary key. And like I said, I'm not going to go through a lot of this now. That's essentially your job to investigate that and ask questions as you go, especially when we get into developing your project. All right, with that said, oh, let me mention one thing. You can close one of the tabs here, and SQL SSMS will give you the opportunity to save the query. I would definitely recommend this. So if you click yes, you can give the query a specific name, and it will save it into the SQL Server Management Studio kind of repository. So definitely, whenever you close SSMS, save the queries, and because you will probably need those later, especially when you're creating tables or modifying tables, etc. All right, so that's SQL Server. I don't have a MySQL workbench loaded, but it's actually the same kind of structure. There's an Object Explorer, and there's a new SQL workbench window. And those of you that are curious, let's see how many participants I had. Question in the chat. can we save other locations? Yes. You can change the location of where you save. You can change it to a shared drive, a cloud drive, or whatever. Basically, when you close so I'm just going to create a very basic query just to walk through this, and you can do this on the MySQL as well. So when you close and click yes, this is a regular File Explorer window. You can change the location here in your navigation area to wherever this PC, and then I have cloud accounts. So you can just change, I have shared drives, etc. So yes, you can change the location there. All right. Let's see, what else? Any other questions? Oh, keep that chat open. Okay, so any other questions? Any other issues with week 1 or week 2? Remember, we're moving right along. You do, but not, okay, Jen, go ahead. Ask away. I'll go ahead and close this. All right. Question? Question, Jen? Okay, Jalen, go ahead. Chat, you can type it in the chat or unmute yourself, whichever you prefer. Relationships, I'm still a little confused about one-to-one, many-to-one. It seems like they can be multiple relationships. Whoops.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Hey, so I just had a question because I downloaded the MySQL app, but the part where you like turn the app on, like I'm like completely like confused on how to get the app started. Like, cause yours looks different from mine.
Yes, I'm running SQL Server with SSMS. If you're doing MySQL, are you running it on a Mac then?
No, I'm running mine on a PC.
Okay, if you're running it on a PC, I would definitely recommend running SQL Server rather than MySQL Workbench. It will work better for you. But if you're running it on a PC and it did not create a shortcut for you on your desktop, then something went amiss with the installation. But you can also search. On PCs, it's pretty simple. Let me share my screen again. So in PCs, just either Windows or Windows Server, click on search and you should be able to type in MySQL. And I don't have it on here, but it should bring up the Workbench application where you can start it there. And then you can even navigate from here to create a desktop icon or a taskbar icon. But that's what I would do first. And if you can't find it that way, then there's probably a problem with your installation, would be my guess.
Okay. Yeah, because like on mine, all I have is a SQL Server Configuration Manager.
Yes, so that if you're attempting to install MySQL, it did not get installed, is my assumption. And once again, if you're running a PC, I can tell you the SQL Server Developer with SSMS is the environment that I showed you is a lot easier to deal with. Well, I shouldn't say a lot easier. It's a little bit easier to deal with than MySQL Workbench.
Okay, you said MySQL Server?
Just SQL Server Developer. You can Google that. It'll take you to the Microsoft site, and make sure you download the developer, and it will take you through the full install, including the SQL Server Management Studio.
Okay,
All
gotcha.
right.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm confused about schema. Okay, schema is essentially a level. You go from the database to a schema to a table. For example, and let me share my screen again. To give you an example what a schema is, if you take a look at whoops, my SQL Server here, if I can get my desktop arranged. So just bear with me. I'll give you a pretty good example what schema slash database slash schema slash table. Um, so in this, as soon as it comes up, in this testing area that I have a database, and that database is AdventureWorks 2016 CTP3. If you expand this database, you will see in your table structure that in this database it has human resources, person, production, sales, etc. Those are schemas, and usually in an industry scenario, those schemas are associated with departments. You don't necessarily need the schema. If you don't create a schema in SQL Server, SQL Server will essentially assign DBO, which is database object. That all that means is that that's a database object, and that's the schema. So the schema is just a way of organizing your table structure, in a database scenario. And like I said, you generally don't, if you want to define a schema, so let's say you're creating a table using a query, and let's call this, well, in here we have a schema person. So you would actually create the table person, I'm just calling this a test table. So now when we create this table, it will show up in this, with this list of tables under the person schema. Does that make sense? Or did I confuse you even more? Okay, where are we? Okay. All right. Is that Tigus? Did that explanation make sense? And furthermore, is that the way to pronounce your name? That is correct. Generally, when you create a schema with your table, the notation would be something like, the syntax would be something like this. So you just separate the schema and the table name by a dot. So that in this example, person is the schema, test is the table. All right, sorry, an example is a movie entity and a customer entity, one to many. Oh, who had the many to many, the cardinal relationships? Okay, Jen, so for a relational database model, let's take a school database. Now, one-to-one is there's one student, actually, I'll use this for two types of an example. Let's take a classroom. So we have a table named classroom. So a relationship within that table, there's one classroom, a one-to-many relationship is one classroom to many students. A one-to-one relationship, let's say the teacher, or instructor. There is a one-to-many relationship from teacher to class, but there's a one-to-one relationship from teacher to student in a database. So for example, when we go into grading, we have to grade your assignments one at a time. So from that, with that scenario, that's a one-to-one relationship, one instructor to one student. And still you can have one instructor to the class, which is a one-to-many relationship. Does that make sense? And so mostly, so that's essentially, if you look at your projects, for example, you'll have one client, but that client will have an opportunity to either order a pizza with many toppings or so if you can extract that into a example where, let's say the pizza example, depending on how you write your relational model, there's one customer to one order, but that order could have several, several attributes. Could be one pizza, could be several pizzas, could be one pizza with many toppings. So in all of those scenarios, it's a one to many. But in the one scenario, one customer to one order, that's a one to one. So just think of it that way. Just expand it to kind of a general or generalized common sense model. And that's literally how database cardinality or relationships are designed. So a customer entity and a movie entity would be one-to-one, but what if the customer purchased multiple movies? Well, it's still essentially one-to-one because, well, it depends. Well, it really depends on how you have your relationship set up. Because multiple movies still would be under one order, right? One customer to one order. So it's still one-to-one. The one order could have several movies, but then that relationship would be different. The order to movies would be one to many, but the customer to order would be one-to-one. And that's a very good example of how you would consider that in a relational model. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, other questions? And just to let you know, you're all doing a really good job. The biggest challenge really is to get your platform running. The idea and the concept of dealing with a database in this manner is really not that complex. Now, I'm going to task you to learn SQL, but that's a part of the database learning process. But having this particular platform, and truly, I recommend SQL Server if you're running a PC. It's Microsoft. Once you get it past, the hiccups on the installation and making sure the service is running, and a lot of that depends on your PC, your resources. Hopefully, you're all up to specs on your laptop or desktop, because SQL Server it is a kind of a resource hog. But if you can get past all the past the installation processes, then building your project, hopefully you'll have some fun with that. But some of the aspects of learning about databases, which is what you're writing about, cardinality, normal form, et cetera, that's kind of a pain, but it is the language of databases. So we have to essentially ask you to learn that as well. But you'll see building a project once you start putting your tables together and understanding how that will work, it'll definitely make more sense. All right. Okay, so just to let you know, just to review, we're coming to the end of week 2. I'm a big advocate of you all getting the work done. I don't like deducting points for late submissions, but especially if you contact me beforehand, like if you contact me before midnight tonight and just simply tell me that you're having issues and just ask for an extension, I'm okay with that. But you have to contact me. If you don't contact me, then I have to zero out your score and then I have to deduct points. So I know this is going pretty fast and there's a lot of aspects of it that are somewhat confusing. But the one thing I do recommend, yes, and there was some confusion about the textbook, but there's tons of information valid information that's on the web. So try to read as much as you can about database structures and building a database, um, and you'll be fine. This is not really a difficult class, so um, I don't foresee that anyone will have any major issues with the content. All right. So I'm just doing a basic meeting. I was only going to go for 30 minutes or so, 30, 40 minutes. So please, I mean, as you notice, I'm on, and I'm essentially accessing the course all the time. If you have any questions, please contact me. I definitely pride myself in responding as soon as possible, and hopefully you'll have a good experience in the class. I think once we learn the code format, creating tables and editing will be good. Yes, the book can be difficult and confusing. Um, I would kind of augment the book with, you know, there are tons of good information on the web. There's even on the SQL server or Microsoft SQL or SQL W3 School site. There's tons of ways you can practice the queries. You can practice them right on the site. You can practice them in your workbenches as well. So yes, and that's the biggest thing about SQL. It's not, there's no magic to learning it. It's mostly repetition. You know, when I was working as a DBA, it took me 2 years to get past just basic select statements and understand joins and all that fun stuff. But creating the database actually is the easiest part. Creating the correct relationships but within your tables and all that is a little bit harder, but it shouldn't be overly complicated. And very quickly, for example, when you're creating things like a pizza ordering system, obviously you have ingredients, initial order, it changes in order. So you do have to think of your database creation as a product of you thinking through the actual process of what the database is going to be used for. The SQL will come, the queries will come. The creates are really easy, create table, and then primary key, et cetera, et cetera. Don't overcomplicate that, at least initially. What I would recommend, go through and just create your tables, just basic tables. You can always edit your tables or modify your tables afterwards. Essentially creating, indexing, primary keys, all of that stuff as we get into those topics more. All right, enough of rambling on for me. Are there any, lingering questions? Is everyone in good shape to finish up the assignments for this week and move on to next week? Yeah, so someone just asked, or Jen just asked about the exam. Since it's all open book and open notes and open web, basically a lot of the exam goes over what you've done as far as basic. So my tip is just, don't overthink it. Stick with your first instinct as far as an answer and, move on to the next question. The biggest problem I've seen with students, they begin to overthink what they think they know, and that's always a trap for testing. How to remove text box in case of doing ER diagram. Text box in what faction? In your ER? Oh, can you rephrase that question, Tigris? I have the e-textbook. Will I be allowed to? Yes, you can. The exam is all open book. We don't proctor or use any type of restrictive browser. Yes, you can use the e-textbook, Jake. Welcome. So there was a question about text box. I'm not sure what I understand what you mean, Titus. instead, in case of doing an ER diagram. Oh, I don't know if you all saw the video, but I do have time, but I do want to mention that there's a tool, it's a free tool that you can use, the trial version called Lucid Chart. That once you've started building your database, you can use that application or that platform to create a pretty high-end entity relationship diagram. And just I posted a video in Canvas in the announcements. So if you review that, you go to Lucid Chart, you register, you do have access to that platform. And ERD Plus is another good tool, Jen, yes. Both of those tools are really easy to use, and you get a professional looking diagram from them. So, and it's wide open for those type of platforms. I do want the students to begin to develop more of a true ERD. I know some of you are using a basic flowchart diagram, but yes. Yes, that's a very good video, Keith. So take a look at that link that Keith posted in the chat. And it'll definitely, if you want to use Lucid Chart, it'll definitely help you. And the good thing about Lucid Chart, you can import your database, and basically you have access to the tables, and it will create a basic cardinality or ERD for you. After the import, you just click and drag the tables into the working area. All right. Great. So once again, I'll post this little video in the announcements. And yes, if you have any questions, please let me know. And look forward to seeing you out. I will try to do a midweek Zoom. We had a lot of things going on last week, and I just ran out of time. But I'll try to do a midweek Zoom Wednesday, probably early evening Arizona time, so that I can get an idea where everyone stands. But all right, so thank you all for attending. Once again, if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out and keep up the good work. And I really appreciate all the work that you all do. All right? Okay, take care, and I will see you all in class.